I'm a big believer in the leadership development industry, and I think that coaching and lots of other providers do great jobs. I just don't think it's anywhere near scalable enough.
Right.
So our USP is that we sort of say in leadership development, what works doesn't scale, and what scales doesn't work. And that's until us. We solve that problem.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Helping People Perform podcast. Delighted to be joined today by a good friend of mine all the way from New Zealand. We've got on the show CEO and founder at Adeption, who bringing that digital coaching to, as well as all sorts of other wonderful stuff that we're going to cover off in today's session. But the key bit is about democratising leadership development. And I really want to come back to that point when I talk to the wonderful Carl Sanders-Edwards. So welcome to the show today, Carl.
Yeah, hi Paul, good to be here.
Always a pleasure to chat, mate. And we've known each other for a number of years. We met when I was living in New Zealand, and we've kept in touch ever since. And you're doing some amazing stuff. So before we get into the stuff that you're doing today, can you give us a little bit of background as to what got you to where you are today?
So you want the full arc of the story?
You go for it, mate.
I was at a bit of a crossroads at the end of school, and I was wondering about whether I had an opportunity to go up to the top of the Coromandel Peninsula here in New Zealand and spend a year at a campground taking people fishing and diving and sort of looking after a couple of large rib Zodiac boats and driving people around. It seemed pretty glamorous, and I still wonder actually, maybe. But anyway, I went and studied engineering, and in that it was a manufacturing engineering, and through my internships I got to work with Toyota. Super fascinated by the Toyota production system and the idea that you can change entire organizations really with lots of incremental steps and by putting a lot of power in the people that are doing things. And so that was a great experience. And after that, I got into software development and worked with a large consulting firm. And that was right when Agile was first hitting, and it was becoming a big deal, really. And from a psychological or from a human perspective, all I could see was the same thing, really. Lots of short sprints, iterative. You make really complex things through lots of small sprint-based experiments. You're learning along the way, and all the people involved are learning. So I kind of, although the methodologies were different, they used different words, it felt like at a human level it was very, very similar. Moved to the UK, worked for a startup that became very successful. It was rightmove.co.uk, so a number of you will know that still. Very early days, and we had this explosive growth, and we're applying design thinking and human-centered design and lean startup principles. And again, it was just the same pattern repeating. And so I kind of like finished those experiences pretty lucky, and with a bit of this utopian view of business, and like, this is great, it's a good place, you can have a lot of fun, you can be healthy, you can thrive. And then I came slamming back down to earth basically by working for a couple of your typical large corporates, which will remain nameless. But I was like, oh, so this is what everyone's talking about, and that was where I got really curious in this idea about how we can make work and the experience of work something that's really fulfilling for the soul and high performance, and people can thrive and be their best and have a career. And it's not like this whole work-life balance thing where you have to go, well, I need to earn lots of money so one day I can retire and do what I want. It just sort of seems like a silly way to live your life. So got really curious in that space, and we can talk more about it, but that's really what drew me into the field of leadership development, because rightly or wrongly, it felt like all roads pointed to leadership. And leadership as a verb, like leadership is in everyone, not just the senior leaders. Yep. So I sort of got really fascinated by that, and the implementations of both the lean production systems or agile or really progressive design thinking based organizations. It felt like there needed to be quite an evolved set of leadership practices amongst a number of people to make them really work. We always kind of focused on the processes, but I thought at the end of the day, I think it was the greyware in the people's minds that really made the difference, rather than the hardware or the software or the processes and procedures. So yeah, it's kind of where we got, and just so inspired to work in the space.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant! And I know you took some time and went off and did, like, was it an MBA over in the States, and got some great experiences there as well. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, well, that was also really pivotal. So I sort of, before that time, I got into leadership development early days, and was sort of piloting this idea of iterative leadership development, where the idea of work and development aren't different. They just come the same. I mean, the best way that you spend about 2,000 hours at work every year, and you might spend 20 or 30 hours in training or formal development a year. It's like, just a minute, the two are the same. I mean, all of the work happens in the work. And we would ask people, when you develop the most, and they'd say, describe job experiences. So it's like, how do we enhance those and make people have them more mindfully? And so we'd already started that through a series of a methodology, which was like a series of sprints. What's your biggest challenge? How do you work on it? How don't you? And plan an experiment that you're going to do on the job. And then you do that, you get a better result, you develop, you reflect how you went, and then you go again. And so that was really exciting. But in the middle of it, I got the scholarship to go and do an MBA, and it was at an entrepreneurship school, Babson College, which is focused on entrepreneurship. So I was in with 140 other students from 40 different countries. More than half of us were running businesses at the time. And it kind of just blew my mind up, because at the time I was imagining that the purpose was to improve the productivity of New Zealand. And it was noble, but it's almost embarrassing to say that now, because New Zealand's small, it's already very privileged, and it does, very well, and people have good experience of life. And we share this incredible planet with 8 billion other people. And I had a few people there sort of say, I was learning a lot about entrepreneurship and the process of it, which again was a repeating pattern.
Yeah.
Same one from lean and Toyota Production System, Agile, design thinking. The same thread came through, but it really opened my eyes and opened my field of impact and the vision. And it was kind of became like, yeah, do something serious. This is not like a lifestyle business. This has a real meaning and real purpose. And so we've got team members now in India and the US, and as well as New Zealand and Australia, and want that to continue growing. So very, very pivotal.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think that speaks volumes about you, Carl, where you think New Zealand, having that ambition to change New Zealand, and then go, well, that's not big enough. Or maybe I can do more. I think that in itself is such an ambitious piece, but that step of learning from others and opening the mind and go, actually, in terms of who I can help and what I can do and the impact I can have on the world, maybe I should open up, because that has a bigger impact on the world itself. So it's what were some of the experiences that sort of drove to that then? What some of those conversations that you were having, or were there any pivotal moments there?
Well, there are a few. I love how generous you are. I'm thinking this still may prove to be a folly, but but it's a great, I'm a big believer in life experiences, and just leaning into them and enjoying them. But there are a few. So I'd lived in London, like I mentioned, and my wife and I traveled extensively. We spent 9 months when we were traveling the world, really, in many ways, and sleeping in a tent. And so that opened our eyes. But it really wasn't until probably being in that study with people from lots of different countries, and they were all privileged, and they would tell me about their countries.
Right.
And it was 2011, and I remember seeing a presentation that showed how many solar panels on a globe it would take to supply double the energy that we needed. And they were kind of like 6 pinpricks. Right. And that view, I kind of guess, combination of being around a lot of people from different countries and them sharing their experiences of their countries, and seeing the world as this sort of finite place in a very, very, and it's our capsule, it's our thing, kind of really motivated me to think, what's the point of a country like New Zealand being good? We're all connected. We're all part of this big system. And if we're not all doing well, nobody's doing well. And it was through a couple of years, it really, really woke me up to that and got me inspired about the challenges that we're facing. As a species, we're not really living in harmony with the planet that keeps us alive. And it was sort of stark. I don't know, I just really felt like it. So that was on one point, and I sort of thought, well, we've created a lot of complexity for ourselves, and a lot of it's great. Like, I'm not a doom and gloom person at all. We've standards of living are better than they've ever been in human history. I still think we're borrowing from the future, though, and it's like, unless we start really adjusting, then we're going to be in trouble. And we kind of need to create another, as we've done in the past, another great metaphor that guides how we live on this planet and with each other. And yeah, lots and lots and lots of people developing themselves as humans, let alone leaders, I think is the way that we'll come up with that new metaphor. So that all sort of went down there. And and then the other side of it, the kind of commercial side of it, was a pitch competition that we had. And this is kind of the Machiavellian side of the complete contrast to what I just said. Is, yeah, this investor, and he goes, nice vision, but unless you can do something digital and really scale what you do, because we were just running workshops at the time, you're a joke. He literally said that. And I was a bit offended at the time, and I didn't like him. But I kind of, if I track him down at some stage in the future, I'll thank him, because that was really one of those things that just keep, well, I'm telling you now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, one of the things that always struck me in my time in New Zealand, and is there is something about the New Zealand people that allows them to bat above their average and yet still be sort of humble and still have total poppy syndrome, and that goes along with that as well. What do you think it is about growing up in New Zealand that allows you to almost have that ability to have that mindset of let's go wider, let's go outside to the world, as opposed to just keeping it too insular?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, Paul. And we've all only got our own experience.
Yeah.
And although it's small, there's lots and lots of different lives and experiences in a country like New Zealand. But there's a few things, I think that there is a real culture of, and it's an expectation to travel.
Yeah.
Because it's small and it's island based, but there's still sort of like high standards and good education systems. And so you sort of know about the world, you're connected to it, you realize that you're part of it, and it's a wonderful place to live. I mean, you know that.
Yeah.
But there's also this almost an expectation that you go and broaden your horizons. And the Great OE is a real passage. I grew up in a town of 7,000 people, and I lived there until I was 17, 18. I knew more people in London and New York when I was in my 20s than I knew in the town that I grew up in New Zealand, because they were all there, and other people that I met in university. So I think what happens with that is you sort of, just because it's an expectation and it's relatively easy, and we're lucky there's a good, strong social fabric as well. So, they talked a lot about it at Babson. Don't think about risk, think about acceptable loss. So the worst you can lose is a couple of years.
Yeah.
And if you take a lifelong view, you're going to gain a lot over a couple of years. So you're not sort of worried about losing your income over a few years when you're young. And what happens is you just go out and it's vertical leadership development's a big thing that we talk a lot about. And one of the principles that Nick Petrie, as you know, talks about is colliding perspectives. And so I think you've got a big portion actually of the population who get exposed to a lot of colliding perspectives. Yeah. And they've got to be, it's very growth inducing, because, mum and dad aren't there. You're out in the big bad world, and you're traveling in Africa, or you're sleeping on a floor in a flat in central London. And it's really growth inducing. And lots of people from everywhere do that. But just one of the things, it's like, I can't remember the stat, but at one stage I read it was something like 25% of 25 to 35-year-olds that hold New Zealand visas are living offshore at any given time. So it's a big proportion. And I think that really helps. I think that's one of just those conditions. So, I'd encourage everyone to go and have as many experiences as they can widely, especially while you're young and, still malleable and flexible. Some of the most innovative people I know, not from New Zealand, but there's one guy in San Francisco who's brought up in Paris. Parents were from the US, spent 6 years in Papua New Guinea, and surprise, surprise, he does incredibly innovative, interesting things, because he's had all these different perspectives, and that's melded him into a human that's really unique and interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we know about colliding perspectives, and I'm sure we'll cover that off in a little bit. But that OE, the overseas experience for those non-Kiwis around us, it's such a big part. As you say, it's the expectation that as soon as you finish school or you finish university, you're going to spend some years And more often than not, certainly in the people that I've known, those people gather those experiences and they come back to New Zealand and make something awesome of it after, once they've done that. And they don't have to. Many of them stay abroad and live abroad. But yeah, it enriches the country as well as just the individual and their families as well. It's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, and hopefully other places and other people as well.
Yeah.
That's certainly the ambition that I have. Maybe it's just a sign of getting older, but you just sort of see more connections all the time.
I think just thinking about it now, if you think about, you've got the Kiwis, the Aussies, the South Africans, the Irish, who are all relatively small countries in the world, and they've got such a big impact in, wherever you go, you'll find some Kiwis, you'll find some South Africans, you'll find some Irish people, and then you look at how well those countries are performing on certain levels, and you go, actually, yeah, there's a reason that they're doing this. They're getting those colliding perspectives, and they're bringing them back, and they're sharing them with the world. Oh, there you go. I've just hit on something there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that helping people perform, the theme of your podcast and what we're here talking about, I'd say, I think it's one of the biggest things. It's got nothing to do with what my business does or what we offer now, but I really think that living a life rich in experiences and exposing yourself to different things and challenging some of the comforts that you have is a real performance inducing move. I mean, we know that from the field of deliberate practice and high performance sports. Doing things that are comfortable doesn't induce the neurons connecting and the myelin wrapping and all those things that make you really perform at your very best as much. I mean, it doesn't, and unless you're really pushing yourself and doing hard, difficult things. So, and they don't have to be. They're always the highlights of your life anyway.
Precisely. So maybe that takes us nicely into what you do now. So tell me about Adeption and who you help and how you help them.
No, great. Our angle is we work with corporates mainly, and we're really in this, we call it leadership development. I like to think of it more broadly as human development. We naturally develop and grow through our lives. So I'd challenge anyone to say that they're still the same person they were 10 years ago. I mean, we know it when you're kids, and kids grow up, and 15-year-old has got a lot more capabilities and capacities than a 5-year-old. It doesn't mean the 5-year-old's bad or any less. It's just different. And I think if we reflect back on our life, we make sense of the world in different ways. And it's a perfectly natural thing. And it's beneficial in lots of ways too. Each phase we grow through as adults are beneficial. It's not beneficial getting stuck though, and sort of and we can do, it's a natural thing to keep growing. So I think a lot of societal and organizational structures we have are a little bit stuck inducing. So under the guise of leadership development, we try and help people be a bit less stuck and keep growing. And so it's not something you do to somebody, it's something that you invite from them. And what we find is that one of the best ways to grow is just to tackle the challenges that you've currently got in front of you, rather than go off and do some theoretical courses or learning or coaching about introspectively. It's actually around what's important to me now? What are the challenges I've got? Why is it important? We call it be conscious as the first phase.
Yep.
So really wake up, say what's happening, what's working, what's not working, and be really aware of those things, and then help people be really curious. What other ways might you be approaching this? Have you been, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing 100 times and expecting a different result. So it's just kind of creating a little bit of space for people to explore the other ideas that they might have and other people. And that's where content and things come in, and then plan a smart experiment that they're going to take on the job that will help them achieve what's important to them in the job. And almost it's a flipped thing. And as a side effect, they'll grow and develop, because once they've done it, they reflect. If you do it in a social sense, you can just you can actually create a tsunami, because you imagine a large group of people all planning deliberate experiments about how to do their jobs better, more mindfully. And they develop in the process, then reflecting and sharing their reflections with each other. And that inspires, it's kind of like a chain reaction that inspires somebody else to sort of pause and reflect and think about what's important to them, what's working, what's not, plan an experiment, actually do something, because that's what makes things change. And then they reflect and share it, and so we really work on creating those conditions to allow that sort of mindset to shift from being uh, passive and reactive to being really proactive and creating in themselves and their workplace. And so we work with organizations and create experiences and programs that do that for populations of people. Our edge is, I'm a big believer in the leadership development industry, and I think that coaching and lots of other providers do great jobs. I just don't think it's anywhere near scalable enough.
Right.
So our USP is that we sort of say in leadership development, what works doesn't scale, and what scales doesn't work. And that's until us. We solve that problem. Because leadership is certainly not about the C-suite or even the top 3 or 4 layers. I took a photo at Facebook a number of years ago, and at the time, Mad Men, the TV program, had just come out with the kind of advertising executives from the 50s. And I was sort of thinking, this is interesting. Back in the 50s, these 2 guys drinking cognac and smoking cigars might have impacted millions of people.
Yeah.
And that was leadership. And then this photo, there was a bunch of 20-year-olds writing code on Facebook. And I'm thinking, these people are impacting billions of people. And so if you think of the scope and span of leadership and the way our organizations and work has changed, I think that it's something that really needs to be democratized. I don't think there are many jobs left now that don't require a high degree of leadership, personal leadership, and even followership, which is all in the same field. But most jobs and people aren't getting the support that executives do. And so we think that's a really worthwhile problem to address. And so, yeah, we do that, and hopefully it'll spill over into society and just how we live on this planet as well.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I've had the privilege of supporting you guys in delivering some
Absolutely.
of this stuff. And some of the things that stand out to me are, firstly, the scale element, and the fact that one of the first things to talk about is that leadership piece is the people who get access to this stuff aren't typically what you would call leaders necessarily. There are some leaders within those groups, but it's about having a deliberate cohort of people who are from mixed backgrounds, mixed levels of experience, and realizing that they're all leaders in some way or another. And that really is, for me, is that one of the critical elements to the difference maker to typical sort of standard development practices and programs that have happened in the past. It's like, right, everybody at level 4 in the business get together and do this. And it's like, that can have an advantage, but actually, and I think one of the other things that you guys have done is you were ahead of the game when it came to doing this virtually. And so can you tell us how, when COVID came about and how that changed the model and changed the delivery model, and how the advantages that you've seen from that, and maybe some disadvantages?
Yeah, that's a really good thing. I mean, in many ways, I think it unfroze the world. And as far as embracing technologies, maybe this is another thing from being from a small, far distant country. I was in Boston doing an MBA, and we had New Zealand's biggest company as a client at the time. And they were operating in a number of different countries, and it was going really well what we were doing in New Zealand. And we hadn't built our digital technology at that point, but they came to us and said, this is 2012, and said, can we run a global cohort? And of course, being too dumb to know any difference, I was like, of course. And was lucky I had fellow students working on the project with me, and we had a cohort of people from New Zealand, Australia, China, Chile, Chicago, California, and I think it was Germany. And we ran a leadership development experience with them using, and this is 2012, we had virtual post-it notes, we had asynchronous sessions, we had breakouts, we were using WebEx at the time, we experimented heavily, we had a collaboration platform that we wove in, and that was really eye-opening because people didn't like it quite as much as the face-to-face, but the long-term results were better.
Right.
You couldn't hide. It was like you can't just turn up and sort of be there in the back of the room and sort of thinking about the weekend. Yeah, if you didn't do stuff, it was really, really obvious. And so that was really one of the genesis pieces for us getting into lots of blended asynchronous and synchronous delivery, and ultimately building our platform, which helps uses technology to do a lot of the sort of heavy lifting of scale, and still though leaves the human element to do what it does best, which is around connection and empathy and inspiration. So that was sort of well underway, and I was living in the US. We were living in San Francisco. I'd moved the family there, and it was quite a hard sell because economy was good, and it was just too easy. If you believed in leadership development and wanted to do it, you said, well, we'll just get people together and we'll run cohorts and we'll spend the money and fly them around and we'll come and get them in. And we're like, yeah, but what about the on-the-job stuff? Oh, well, it'll take care of itself. And so when COVID first hit, there was a lot of interest in what we were doing, and it brought a lot of. I think the pendulum swung too far though, and it kind of swung past us in some ways to fully digital things and there was a lot of experimentation happened, and it needed to happen because it hadn't been happening for about 10 years, and Zoom exploded and other things. So it really opened people's eyes to what was possible. And now I feel like the pendulum's swinging back a little bit to somewhere in the middle. And it's this kind of like, you can get so far with highly digitized technology-based things, but you miss a bit too. Engagement levels are often very low, for example, and it's just hard. But now it's swung back, and it hasn't swung back to where it was. It's swung back to somewhere in the middle in this blended thing, which is personally, I feel like a real sweet spot of ours. Yeah. And we've been doing it for a number of years, and others are doing it great now as well. And I'm happy for it, because this is, it's a blue ocean out there. It's a big world of opportunity and need. Yeah. So, so it's a good question. I feel like the whole field and this idea of accessible development and leadership development, and the idea of blending technology with face-to-face or synchronous at least, is in a really good place.
Can you expand a little bit for people who don't necessarily know what you mean by synchronous and asynchronous? How do those two things differ?
Sorry, it's a good question. It's a really good question. So when I say synchronous, and that is when you have people together in the same time, almost the same space. It might be the same space, but it's the same time. So you and I at the moment, Paul, are synchronous. We are talking live, even though you're in literally the other side of the planet. So we're certainly not in the same space, but this is a synchronous connection. We can fluidly talk to each other. If we were emailing each other backwards and forwards, that's asynchronous. So we're not in the same time. So synchronous can either be virtual like this or face-to-face. And by asynchronous, another thing that in the learning field, people often call it self-paced. Right. I don't really like that so much, because we sort of like really guide people through their asynchronous things. And self-paced means I won't do it often. So asynchronous coaching is a big thing. Like we feel like you can do a lot with digital coaching, with coaching scripts that people go through. And if somebody gets stuck, then they reach out to a person, and they may want to set up a synchronous call. So hopefully I haven't confused things any further. But
no, it makes complete sense. And I think that brings us nicely into this bit about if you could tell us a bit about what a typical engagement for a corporation would look like for you, and maybe what are those elements of the synchronous and the asynchronous, and how does the program and the app support each other?
Great. Yeah. So first of all, the key thing is the underlying methodology is about on-the-job experimentation. That's how you grow. So you're sort of doing your job and growing at the same time. So every interaction that we have with people, that they should be resulting in them saying, I'm going to go and try something. I've had some insight, and they try it. And before they start the next thing, they reflect on how it went and share that reflection with others. And that's really growth inducing. So that's the underlying methodology that underpins everything that we do. A typical engagement will be something along the lines of what we call a dumbbell. So you may get on our app, and that's asynchronous. You introduce yourself and you sort of become familiar with it. You might do an assessment, because very much like going to the gym or getting fit, it helps if you kind of know where you're starting from. And development you'd have to do a lot of work. We expect people to work, so it's good to sort of know that. So some sort of assessment individually, work out where you are. And then we'll have the dumbbell we'll have a synchronous connection. It's either through Zoom or face-to-face. And a cohort of people come together, and they are meeting each other for the first time, but they've been on the app together. So they're kind of like going, oh, that was you. And it's really quite a neat experience. And they kick off their journey, they go through a process, they plan some experiments, and they get really, really clear on how they're going to go for the next 5 or 6 months, which is about how long these cohort-based experiences work. Then they'll go back in and asynchronously, they're working, doing what we call workouts, again, taking the exercise analogy on the app, and each workout gets them reflecting, exposes them to some fresh ideas. There's some AI that sort of says, hey, based on how you answered those questions, this might be useful content for you. And then they plan an experiment based on that. And they do it with each other so they can see each other's answers, but not until they've answered themselves. And they can also have little small peer groups, which are like the table, often the same table that they sat together or the same breakout group they were in. They do a few, make a lot of progress, and then we'll have another synchronous connection towards the end where it's they reflect on all the progress they've made, they celebrate with each other, and they really get to see, like I said earlier, wow, I'm seeing the world differently than I was before, and my team's performing better, and I'm, my results have lifted. There might be a retake of an assessment, and then really importantly, they commit to an ongoing journey, and this is where the app's strength really comes in. And that for a very low price point, they can continue get support around the typical challenges they might be facing on the job. So we sort of call them coaching conversations that are based around the challenges that they face. And so they then go on to, they may only go in once or twice every month or two, but when they do, they get really specific help and they plan another experiment. And the last thing I'll say is that multiple cohorts come through the same experience. This is the idea of scale. And the app, the platform, acts as a container for all of the wisdom and knowledge that has gone before you. So if your cohort, and we've got a few organizations that have 100 plus cohorts through, so thousands and thousands of people, and the 4,000th person is benefiting from the wisdom of the 3,999 that have gone before them. And that is really where the power of it comes in, because us as facilitators and coaches can only do this much, but you've got all of that embedded wisdom. And even better, if that person 4,000 likes or interacts digitally with person one may have finished their cohort experience 4 years ago. They get a like and a comment, and it's all completely organic, and it's unforced, and they're delightful. And when we talk to those people, they're like, it just came flooding back to me. Right. That whole thing I did, the group of people I did it with, it came flooding back to me with that. And I remembered answering that question, and I remember my experiment, and then they're inspired to go again. So we sort of create this real sustainable ecosystem that just keeps rolling. So that's a typical engagement. There's obviously variations within that, but that's sort of typically how it works out.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the things I've always loved about it is the word experimentation. You've mentioned it a lot in what you're doing, and I found that people tend to be a bit scared by that. It's like, what am I going to experiment? What if the experiment goes wrong? But it's about making those small experiments and making them achievable and real to their real life, and maybe giving them some opportunities to play those and practice those with their cohort or their little teams, but just to try it and see what's what. So yeah, I mean, it's been a great method of just getting people to try incremental change, and we all know the power of that as it goes through.
Yeah, I mean, there's a slew of books that are kind of like based on the same ideas, Tiny Habits and Atomic Habits and Smart Change. So yeah, it is neat to see, because the cost or the potential cost of failure is almost without a doubt lower than what people assume. Right. So it's just creating those conditions where it feels safe to go and do that.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant stuff. Well, let's switch the question round a bit. How do you get help? How do you get help with your performance? Who do you go to? What's your method for sharpening the saw for Carl?
The honest answer is my wife. So it's we talk a lot, we reflect a lot. She gives me a lot of feedback, and it's just, it's amazing. I think it's those relationships in your life that can provide a lot, and relationships where people are close enough to you and know you well enough, and you're not threatened by them, that they can be honest with you as well. And so that really helps. And so I'm sort of like, I think that would be a great thing, if it's not your partner, it's somebody that's like that and has that much care for you, but they care so much for you, they're prepared to tell you the things that most people won't tell you. So I certainly benefit from that. I really do. And I use our platform a lot. I'm sort of feel a bit spoiled because I get to test a lot of our experiences. We call them experiences rather than programs, just because you try to have an experience through it.
Yeah.
And I do them for real. Like we often get told, it's okay, just add an X, go through the whole thing. I know, I'm answering the questions, and I've got things here on the wall that I've created, and they're all from doing the workouts on our platform. And so I get a lot from that, and I get a lot from the people that are using the platform. We get to video create little assets of leaders sharing their tips, and they get created through use of the platform. So I get to see a lot of those, and it kind of just keeps blowing up my mind. So yeah, that's another way. And diverse friends and people, I'm a big believer in. So the town I live in at the moment, I coach cricket, and I hang out with plumbers and builders and school teachers and lawyers and all sorts of different vocations from the current one. And you just learn so much from those. You pick up little tidbits from conversations, and so I just sort of think keeping that really diverse set of perspectives. It's a really good question to think about. I read a lot as well, so that's and much to my wife's disgust, I tell her everything I read. So then that reinforces it. So there's a few things, but yeah, I think that one of the big ones is just having that access to those different points of view.
Yeah, wonderful. And so a couple of quicker questions now. If you could help any individual, team, or organization with the skill set that you've got, who would you want that to be?
Yeah, I don't know if they'd want my help or our help, but anyone that is. Thanks for preparing me for this question, Paul, because it really got me thinking. And anyone, I feel really deeply about this. Anyone that's really dedicating themselves to directly supporting the way that humans live in harmony with this planet and everything else on it. And I know some of those organizations can sometimes polarize and they become politicized, but underneath it all, I do think it's the biggest challenge that humanity has. And I feel like I'm indirectly doing it at the moment, like I said earlier, through sort of trying to raise this the collective consciousness of how we live by lots and lots of people kind of spending more time actually waking up and being aware of what they do and experimenting deliberately, and not just kind of writing their own script rather than just sort of following what they think should be told. But I do feel like I'd love to, if I was going to dedicate 100% of my time to anything else, it would be people or organizations that are just very directly working in that space. And it's even just telling you that it inspires me a bit. So maybe I should do something about it.
Good. Try an experiment and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
And on the flip side of that, if you were to sit down, have a coffee, have a beer with someone who you think you could learn from and improve your performance, who would you want that to be?
Well, there's lots, and I feel really lucky in my role. I get to meet an enormous amount of super interesting people and pick their brains, and it's just such a privilege. So, sitting here in a tiny town in New Zealand and talking to people from all over the world every single day, and it makes you pinch yourself. But maybe because of that, I really think sitting down with aliens and having a beer. And listening to them, asking them about what they see of us on this planet and how we interact with each other and what we're doing with this pure objectivity of kind of like not being, there's a great saying you can't read the label from inside the can. And I think, we're all in the can, and myself, hands up, fully included, and can't really see things for what they are. Like we construct our own realities around our own experiences and what we see. And so I think an alien's perspective and just to really quiz them about what they see would be amazing. I've partly stolen that, I think, and maybe the closest real person, and I hope he won't take any offense, is Yuval Nahari, who wrote *Sapiens* and Homo Deus, is because as I was reading those books, and he was, as an anthropologist, a historian, going through humans and how we've come to be how we are now and how we might be next, it felt like I was reading from somebody who had really managed to separate themselves from the can. And that was what I appreciated so much about those books. So next to an alien, it'd be really digging in there with Yuval. So that's it'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be. I'd love to join you on that chat, basically. So finally, Carl, how do people find out more? How do they connect with you and connect with Adeption?
So the easiest way is Adeption, www. I don't need to say that, do I? www.adeption.io. It's IO.
Yep.
And I'm happy for anyone to connect with me directly too. It's Carl S at adeption.io. So it's just CARLS at adeption.io. Yep. I may not respond immediately. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Carl Sanders-Edwards. But anyone of our team, we're sort of really passion and purpose driven. So through the website, anyone will answer and you'll get as good or better response to myself. But I'm just forever curious person and love meeting different people. So that's why I make me, feel free to reach out directly as well.
Brilliant. Well, Carl, as always, an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And thanks so much for being on the show today, Carl Sanders-Edwards.
Thanks, Paul. Love what you're doing.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.